Welcome, everyone, throughout time and space for this new episode of Weebs on the Weekends, the podcast where we break down the anime news highlights of the week and give a retrospective look on an anime that premiered 10 years ago. Today's episode, we will cover the 4th week of August 2022, after which we will give our thoughts on whether to resurrect or rebury the 2012 anime film Berserk, the Golden Age Arc 2, the Battle for Doldrey. My name is Sam Martinez. I'm a part-time weeb, full-time automail mechanic, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Jay Johnson, part-time weeb, full-time English language sensei. Again, time codes in the description below, and for those of us, for our dear listeners who are only following us on YouTube, please check out our full episode if you want to get the full experience, because we had definitely talked about some interesting news in what Japan is doing moving forward, and maybe something that's quote-unquote cringe, that made us cringe, or that will make you cringe. That's for you to decide. So, onwards to our choice of anime for the day. We will be talking about Berserk, the Golden Age Arc 2, the Battle for Doldrey movie. And, Jay, as you had mentioned a little bit earlier, this movie was a little cringe for you. Would you like to explain why, or would you want me to go over the synopsis first?
Just a little entry before the synopsis is that this is a follow-up episode to the episode we did with our guest, Gerard Peterson. Well, I know a Jordan now, but also Gerard Peterson, where he talked about the first installment of the movie, and he'll be coming back for the third installment and the final installment of the movie next year, because coming back for the last movie, which is called The Advent, I believe. But yeah, for this is the middle installment, so not really necessary for our guest to come back for this one, because not much happens in this movie, but yeah, you can talk about the premise of it, and I will get into what's cringe about it later.
Exactly. So, quick little synopsis, as Jay had mentioned, this is a sequel movie, and we are following the main characters, Guts, Casca, and Griffith, from their exploits in the previous movie. And the main synopsis in this one is we basically see our main characters take over a fort for their king that has been notorious for being the last bastion and being the only stronghold preventing their kingdom's expansion. And throughout the film, we see their struggles in overcoming this fort and what they do in order to do so. We also see some development from Guts from the previous movie in wanting to become more independent and more on his own, and we get to see how that changes the dynamic of their entire band, which is known as the Band of the Hawks, and we get to see a little bit of the fallout due to Guts' decision. And that's essentially the soup and nuts of the synopsis for this movie. And very much like the first one, this was done by Studio 4 Degrees Celsius. And again, Berserk is from a manga. Its genre are action, adventure, drama, fantasy, horror, supernatural. The themes are gore, military, and mythology. This was a R-rated movie with the length of an hour and a half. Now, Jay, what were some of the thoughts that you wanted to go into? Because it seemed like you had some thoughts, and I have some thoughts, but you being the newer Berserk, or being newer to Berserk, I am interested on hearing your thoughts first.
Right. Yeah, so I guess a lot of my critiques of this, at least the negative ones, is the same as I would repeat from the first episode. So again, I encourage people to go listen to that, because of, just, again, the times that we talked about, how much of the CGI jitteriness affects your viewing pleasure of this, and the constant switching between CGI or, computer-generated images to the traditional 2D cell drawn animations is very jarring. And I actually noticed it more this time. So I think because I knew what to expect, I was paying more attention to it. So again, if you're watching these in sequence, you might pay attention to more of the animation flaws or weaknesses because of that. So it might dampen your experience to that first time where you're like, oh, this is a 10-year-old movie, so of course it's going to be not the best. We talked about that in our episode of Kingdom as well. The ability of animation back in the day to, profile these large epic battles across a giant field is not that spot on. So, to modern eyes, it's going to be very jarring. Where do I want to start? I have so many positive things to say about this, that this was very much a good inclusion, to like a 3-act structure that we're going to be witnessing. Like, so if you're thinking about it in the Lord of the Rings terms, it definitely feels on par with the Two Towers in quality of tackling a fortress that needs to be assaulted. So there's like this design of a Helm's Deep kind of miniatures look to it, because of course this is taking place in like a alternate timeline where it's covering the 100-Year War, which was between the French and the English back in the 1400s. Sorry, I'm not a history guy, but I think that's the proper time period. And they even dropped the name like Tudors and Midland to kind of represent that, but they don't actually use the actual family names or the governments that were in charge. Yeah, it was okay. So sorry, I'm rambling, but it is the positive things I like most about this was that you get that Guts character is at a like precipice of change, I guess. So I like that. Yes, he was a war dog in the first movie. He was more contemplative in this one, and going in the third movie, he's essentially a changed man. He's like, oh, I've only been following the dreams of another that I respect, but how the last movie left off, you got the reveal that Griffith only considered people that follow their own dreams as his friend, so Guts wants Griffith to consider him a friend. And how that gets translated to Griffin is so heartbreaking. I was really feeling bad at the end of this movie. So I got caught up in a lot of the characterization of the characters versus how I was talking very terribly about Casca's character last movie.
So do you think that your view of Casca hasn't gotten any better, or is it more or less the same?
It's pretty much the same. Again, I talked in length about it last time, but they did not give any time to her at all. And what they did show of her repeated the same mistakes as they did with the last movie, and even to an extreme degree in like the first couple of scenes of this movie. And again, I don't want to rag on it that much because I called her a Sakura, like worse than Sakura last time, which proved to be true this time because now they're introducing some real world elements to her struggles. And I'm like, okay, you can't make a realistic character like this, but then put her in clown shoes. So again, it's really rough writing for one character and then like excellent writing for the other two characters. So again, just repeating something. I don't want to repeat what I said last time.
Oh, no. I would say I agree with you, but I feel like with this movie, in my opinion, I felt like it dragged on a bit. That it didn't need to be as long as it was, because it seemed like sometimes when they were focusing on the big battle scenes, it felt like it was a lot longer than it needed to be. And I guess mainly because like I sort of know the end. Like if you are that I would say that would sort of be like a negative of the series. Like if you know like how it's going to end, then you sort of can understand like the outcomes of skirmishes like these. Whereas if you're following this as it's coming out, you don't necessarily know what's going to happen. For instance, like you don't know if Casca's going to die because of what happens to her. Because I knew what the story was going to entail later on. Like it didn't really phase me like what she was going through. But I would say that the interactions between the main three that was mentioned earlier, Griffith, Casca, and Guts, it's a lot better, especially near the end of the film. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the animation for this film, it was during that conflict between Guts and Griffith when Guts was saying that he was going to leave the Band of the Hawk. Like, it felt like from then on, like that's where the budget for the film was in terms of cinematography and animation, because the animation was just so crisp and clean from that moment on when Guts runs into the Band of the Hawk in the field. And even though the ambush for the Band of the Hawks was CGI, it was done a lot better than the CGI in the earlier parts of the film, even though we've seen Guts's feats of strength earlier. So, I mean, am I correct in saying that the animation uptick was around that time, Jay, or am I just biased?
You're completely correct because I noticed it. So there is a really graphic sex scene in this movie, so it earns its R rating. But from that happens after that conflict. But yeah, because there's like a shot happening behind the fireplace, and I'm like, and I had to pause and was like, why is this sex scene so well shot and lit and animated like fluidly? Yeah, so I didn't go back to watch the scene you're talking about when they meet on the top of the hill, but yeah, from there it was like a good stand because that's something that you would show someone to say this is why you would watch the
Yeah, why you
movie,
would watch
but it completely doesn't tell you anything else about the rest of the movie because it's such the high quality production to it that you're like, oh, they put all the money shots at the end of the movie. So I kind of feel promising for the third movie. So again, these were the first two were filmed or sorry, animated together, while the last one was animated later out of the production schedule. So yeah, that probably is the case, is that the first movie did well enough, and then by the time they got to the end scenes for this movie, they were like, oh, here's some more money. So here's some extra time to make it good. So you're going into the third one like with a lot of hype. So yeah, that's probably part of it.
Just going back to the characters, because I just thought about it with Casca. Again, I say Casca's character is a little bit better in this film than it was in the previous film, but as again,
Oh, I
not by
disagree.
much. Oh, really? So I would say no, 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 no. I say better, but not by much, because we like mainly her interactions with Guts, like at the dance party, because we get to see their relationship deepen, and they are, it's not simply just I hate you for the sake of hating you anymore, right? Because Casca now has a little bit more respect for Guts because of how he helped her when she was fallen ill, and she loosened up and she was more warm to him, allowing him to open up to her a little bit, right? Him, because at that time, as you said, Guts was on the precipice of change, right? And he's still wrestling with his feelings on what he has to do in order to be considered an equal by Griffith. And before the dancing hall scene, we see Guts in the middle of the battlefield, like it's just slow buildup of like, what am I doing? What should I be doing? And Casca even goes off to say, "Is like, this isn't like you. Why are you here with us? Because you normally hate this type of thing." And he goes off, just showing how he's trying to change, right? And so I feel like that instance, it's a step in the right direction for Casca's character, but it's not very consistent, right? It's again, like, it's sort of when I start to like Casca's character in the film is when she starts interacting with Guts and Griffith, because I would say even when the showdown between Guts and Griffith, that's when Casca's character becomes good. And even how she leads the Band of the Hawk in the ambush, it's done very well. But and it shows that people respect her and that she can be very capable. But that's for the last third of the film, which is what, maybe 20-15 minutes, and we have this rest of an hour and 15 of soccer of I'm sorry, not soccer, but of Casca's character just being just being a damsel when she shouldn't be. What are your thoughts on um my assessment in those scenes?
Gotcha. Yeah, I was just processing because I was like, hey, cool. One completely opposite sides of the field with this one. So I'm in the camp of yeah, I'm in the camp that her character worsens in this because I get the vibe of that she's okay. For one, okay, as an English teacher, let's do a quick lesson. Do you know where the
Mhm.
word vagina comes from, Sam?
I think it has to do with a sheath, right? Because I remember, because has that line where it's like, every sword must return to a sheath, and I didn't know if that's what they were going for that line, or at least like the writer. But I felt like Guts was just trying to talk to her as best as he can because he's a warrior. Like that's all he knows. Like every sword needs to go back to its master.
Right, because that would be like the more proper way to express that idea if that's what he was trying to convey. But in this, I'm like wrestling on this edge of they keep presenting characters against Casca. So her main adversary in this is General Idon. Idon. He basically wields a giant trident, and he comes up.
Oh, you mean Doctor Robotnik? Sorry, in the English dub, it's Doctor Robotnik's voice or Eggman.
I put him down as Armstrong in my notes.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's a general of the opposing army, and his whole premise is like, oh, like his first introduction with her, oh, like what's a woman commander doing here? Are you just did you only get to your position by sleeping with Griffith? And I will offer you the same position in my army. You can sleep with all my men all you want. You'll have like all these freedoms as long as you sleep with people. So
Yeah,
that's kind of
typical
her.
guy a-hole stuff.
Yeah, in the military sense. And
Hmm.
Guts rides that line as well because, sure, he respects Casca' way of Griffith vouching for her, but
Hmm.
he never really acknowledges her as a opponent to him, which kind of sucks because of how they present her in the first movie. So in this movie, they're like, oh, now she's falling in love with Guts and or at least becoming more amenable to him. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's not the direction you should be going as a strong character. It's like they make so many points of like showing her past of being sexually assaulted and being
Hmm.
saved by Griffith and getting her life purpose and like how that whole worship thing that we talked about in the first episode kind of came about. So there's a lot of fleshing out of her character again, but it's like flushing her character down the toilet as well, in my opinion, because she's going against all these opponents in the story that say like she can't do this because she's a woman, you can't do this, this is your place as a woman, and then she ends up killing them, or at least the general. But
Yeah.
it's like not done in a very satisfying way. So it's not like overpowering. It's not through tactics or intelligence. It just happens for that story beat to feel like it happens.
Hmm.
So maybe
Yeah.
I'm just feeling overly not satisfied with how they presented her character. Like she talks about like when she does go to the ballroom and dance with Guts, she's like, "Oh, do I look pretty? Does this suit me?" And he says like, "Oh, you're lovely," and she like blushes, and like Guts tell him, "Okay, if you had courage, like if you are aspiring to be in my position next to Griffith's side, go dance with him." And she's like, nah, I'm too scared by the end. So it's like, I don't know where her character is going. So in the flashes for the next movie, we see that Guts and Casca have sex. So I'm assuming something happens in the next movie that makes them a lot closer. So I'll see how her character development flushes out fully. But for right now, I'm like going to the third movie, like, wow, you became a worse Sakura than you were in the last time you were Sakura. Okay, cool.
No, I understand, and as I said, like for me, like I like Casca's character from the ballroom scene towards the end, and when she does kill Armstrong Robotnik dude, it is before the ballroom scene, and as you said, like it's very very dissatisfying because when she does overcome her obstacles, it's always like she's always pitted her back is pitted up against the wall, things like that. It's not very satisfying in a girl power type moment. I will say, like, we do get some lines from Guts, like when she does fall ill. He does mentions like, "Hey, you're not acting like you used to." It's like, what, what's going on? Like, there is like that notice, but I'm trying to think of where I'm going with Casca's character. But I guess, like, to get a couple more closing thoughts before we say whether to resurrect or rebury, I sort of want you to remind me on why Griffith is so obsessive with Guts, because it's still boggling to me. I know we've talked about it last time, and I meant to listen to our podcast again, but I didn't make the time to. That um, Guts's aspiration and his view of Griffith, it's very understandable. But I never really understood why Griffith viewed Guts in such a high regard way. We see that he's very conflicted when Guts wants to leave the band, and he's leaving them at their zenith up until this point, right? And I guess, like, he would feel like he's betrayed, but it doesn't like, because he's leaving them at the highest that they've been. That doesn't necessarily mean that he's betraying them. Like, it's definitely a good sign that it's like he's trying to search for what he needs or what he wants. The conflict ensues, and the results are, I would say, like, it's a great show of growth for Guts, because he's a more refined fighter, and basically in one move shows Griffith that he can take him out if he wanted to, but he's not going to. And it just crushes Griffith. And I'm not sure if it crushes Griffith because he lost a pawn that he could depend on, or if he truly lost a friend, because we see him go and basically has revenge sex with a suitor of his, because he's trying to regain that sense of control that he had lost. And we see him curl up and basically weep because Guts had went away. So would you mind would you mind reminding me on why Griffith has such a high regard for Guts, and what your thoughts are on Griffith acting the way he did afterwards?
Gotcha. Yeah, so this is very interesting, and again, don't want to keep pointing back to the first episode, but we talked about how he's a narcissistic. I forgot what the disorder was, but he's a narcissist essentially. And if you buy into the thought that Griffith is wanting to be king, and that Guts is a mad dog, essentially, like, yeah, you kind of put it correctly by just saying he's a pawn, but essentially he's the greatest pawn. He's the greatest chess piece on the board. So, like, he's essentially the queen, that the king by himself can't do much without the queen. And that's how you envision the two, like the king and the queen, essentially two pieces that can't work without one another. And the idea that, well, one thing you said that I'll allude to in my closing today, but I definitely on the side that Guts betrayed them. That Guts betrayed the Hawks and Griffith. Because one, like, if you look at that hilltop scene where he talked about that Guts leaves, he doesn't give an explanation, so he's left the Hawks with the idea that, like, there's a lot of mixed emotions and everybody voices opinions, and that's one of the positives to this whole movie, is that they give a lot of needed attention to the Hawks, because, like, I don't know anyone's names, but you get their character models down in your head, you get their personalities coded down. They don't have any special weaponry or specialization. There's a tall black guy with a mohawk. There's a short young commander. There's a snarky, sleazy guy that's a lady chaser, and then a noble,
a slightly older young guy.
yeah, a noble bowl cut kind of guy. So yeah, it's like you get all their faces kind of memorized in this movie, because a lot of the times there's a lot of close-ups to their actions. A lot of the action scenes are shot close up, so you see that they're actually part of the action, where last movie they were just a part of the crowd. They were just a part of the Hawks, and now you have attention on who they are. So that top scene definitely feels like a betrayal because one, that Griffith doesn't understand Guts, and they don't talk it out because Guts is coming from the stance that I need to become better or follow a dream, and him winning that fight kind of signifies that he breaks Griffith's sword, which symbolizes Griffith's possession over him, essentially.
Yeah.
And then he just walks away, and Casa chases after him, like, "Don't leave," kind of thing. So it's like a lot of mixed feelings. But where was I going with this? Oh, I was going with the sense that Guts is something that Griffith can't replace, and he's never been denied anything since childhood. So you even get that impression that the enemy commander comes out to the battlefield because him and Griffith have a past relationship. I didn't know if it was like a sexual slave kind of situation or what happened with that. Like, they have a small exchange, but I wasn't kind of getting the past flushed out enough. But yeah, it's that Griffith has gotten what he needs to fulfill his dreams. So for whatever badness that's going to happen eventually is a result of this betrayal.
Yeah, and it's just very odd because like you said, he hasn't been rejected anything since he was a child. So when he does get this rejection, he's not given any
context or
he's not really given any context. It's out of the blue to him. And if Guts had just mentioned it, right, or it's like, I felt like I need to grow so that I can be of better service or something like that. If he mentioned something along those lines, like, it would be a little bit better, but that's not Guts' character. He doesn't necessarily know how to emote either. He's just through action. Just going back to Griffith, like, because he's given like this rejection out of nowhere, he acts like a child. He throws a tantrum and he does flex his control over what he does have control over. And even though he does that, like, he finds no solace. But because he was impulsive, he basically undoes everything that he has done up until that point. And it's just I would say, like, it's almost it's leaning towards Shakespearean a little bit, which is why I really appreciate, like, those last few scenes. And it's going to be interesting moving forward and seeing your opinion on the third movie and how things resolve and where they go from there. And it just seems as though, like, a lot of calamity and a lot of tragedy could have been saved or could have been diverted if people just talked things out.
It's. I guess I had a lot more to say about this as well, but I don't think he made an impulsive decision either.
You don't think he made an impulsive decision? You don't think that was impulsive at all?
No, because
Why?
There is a lot of subtlety in the language going on in the scene. Again, like, you don't really. So, like, before the sex scene with him and the princess, there's a lot of strong body language in the performance. Again, like, a moment of just good cinematography is that Griffith withdraws from the princess. Like, he like cups her breasts, and then like retracts his hand, and then he just waits for a confirmation from her that it's okay. So there's no moment in it's no moment in that I feel that he's like pent up or going in for revenge sex or forcing himself. Because like, I think if they wanted to make that more clear, they would have just had him sexually assault her, which makes more sense if you're talking about impulsion and rage and frustration.
I would say, like, if you remember from, like, how Griffith has been up until this point, he has been very manipulative in how he gets what he wants. Like with Guts, because of how Guts is a very physical character, so he does things very physically. With the princess, we've seen him basically manipulate and change her direction just by doing things, distracting her attention. Like when she was trying to talk about actual things in the previous movie and be an actual character, he distracts her with some music, right? Just doing things to distract her attention. And I don't know, like, I felt like again, like with me, like I felt like he was doing things that he knows would work to reinforce to himself, he's like to reinforce the narcissistic person, or to validate his narcissistic tendencies, to show that he does still have control over the people that he believes he does.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways
Mm.
to write that scene or actually just interpret it, period. So it's like that could have been swayed a lot by a different order of operations or even actions.
Mm.
But I think the whole crying part at the end kind of sells it more for me, because it wasn't that a loss of control, is that he's never going to get that back again, because after that he gets captured by the royal guards and he kind of blares out that, oh, the king's in love with his own daughter. And then
Yeah.
that probably wasn't something he just thought of while he was being tortured to death. It's probably something he had in the back of the mind. So it's like he always, and for me, watching that scene and watching the torture afterwards, it feels like he wanted to get caught almost, or, it feels like he went into that situation to be punished because of how he felt letting Guts go. And again, that's maybe just me projecting as
Mm.
a complex appreciator of villains, is that you have to really write your villains in a very believable way for their turn to
Yeah.
be to root for them, essentially. And I think that's really hard to do in like medieval dark fantasy stories, to root for the
Yeah.
villain. So that's why I say it's a betrayal on Gus' part, and that this is a selling point for Griffith's turn. Again, if that happens in the next movie, that either he kills the king or whatever might happen. But yeah, I definitely didn't think it was an impulse decision.
So that's interesting. So you think that it was premeditated? He went in knowing that he was going to get caught, that he was going to get tortured, and that all of his people, again, everything that he built up was going to be taken away from him.
Right, because that's again selling the idea how important Guts is in his opinion. Motion of him becoming king. It's like Guts became, I guess, synonymous with his goal. So like once Guts
Yeah.
left, he just became hopeless. But that doesn't rob you of your intelligence or your narcissism.
And I guess, like, in a sense, like, he was still in control of what he wanted to do with himself. I mean, he just pulled the trigger, and again, he just pulled the trigger himself. So that works. That's very interesting. So now, and you mentioned earlier that this was a good addition story wise to the trilogy so far. So, and I can't remember if you said for the previous film to resurrect or rebury it, but what are your thoughts on this film?
Right. I believe last time that we opted for, since it's a trilogy of movies, we can't really determine if
Yeah,
it's
until
worth
we see it as a
resurrecting
whole.
or rebury. So for right now, I'll give it a resurrect, just because I'm definitely watching the third one. So just on that basis alone, it's like, yeah, like if I didn't like Fellowship of the Ring, I wouldn't have gone to see Two Towers, no matter how much I liked or
Mm.
disliked it. So yeah, resurrect. But I mean, alongside that, why I really was so attracted to this movie over the first one, same way as I'm more attracted to Two Towers over Fellowship of the Ring. I'm just going to keep making that comparison just for easy sakes. Is that
Yeah.
I like that there was a consistent uh, focus on the characters again. So because it felt very much like a setup to the story in the first movie. So like we got the appearance of a demon, which there was no mystical elements in this movie except for like a very quick shot of a fairy in a cage.
Yeah, with that was basically a call to, I guess, where the manga was at the time, because Guts ends up partying with a fairy character, and I think that character is either that same one or is related to the character that he was palling around with at the time the movie came out.
The strengths of this is that like they focus a little bit more on the characters and their not change over time, but like the setup to what's going to happen. Which again, like Gerard very poignantly said that there's a lot of stuff that happens in the third movie, a lot of bad stuff that happens in the third movie. So assuming that we get attached to the characters in this one, because there's going to be a lot of bad stuff that happens to them in the next one. So it very much settled in my mind that this served a better purpose than the setup of the story, like any story does. But I
Yeah.
kind of like the piqued interest, the romantic interest between Guts and Casca for this one, even though I said it does flush her character down the toilet a little bit, it does set up like to a potential, I guess, wellspring of her character in the potential next movie. So we'll see. But yeah, Resurrect for me for this second installment.
So I would say I would agree with you, and that I would resurrect it as well. I am a little hesitant to say because a lot of the reasons why I like this movie and why you like the movie too is the characterization that they have in characters. But as I said before, they don't really do that until the last third of the movie. But it does it well enough, and I am interested to remember why the third one was so good. And hopefully, after watching the third one, it would make me review the second one in a better light. And I'm also very interested to hear your reactions on the third one as well. So, for now, it's a resurrection from the both of us. And Jay, before we go on to close up, did you have any other thoughts or anything in regards to both of us resurrecting it, or anything else that we might have missed that you wanted to mention?
No, just the kind of ploy. Well, I guess one thing is that the ploy to get the castle or to penetrate the fortress was just to have all the enemies empty the fortress, which I don't think is ever something that a military organization that's been standing for more than 100 years would do. So it's like, it was kind of hard to believe that that's what, the writers came up with, or I don't even know if that's from the original manga from Kentaro, but it just seemed like a very contrived way to breach Helm's Deep when, like, in the Lord of the Rings movie, they used a giant explosive. So it was like, I didn't know what I was expecting, but I was kind of expecting some military brilliance of like going over the cliff face, which there is a cliff that's over the fortress, and I thought they were going to like rain bombs or something over it. But I was trying to problem solve before they actually did it. But I was like very underwhelmed that that's how they won the day, essentially.
You're like, oh, come on, Griffith. You've done better. I've seen you. You can do better than this.
Other than that, no.
Okay. So, again, that was a unanimous resurrection for the both of us on the second Berserk movie. And we will be on hiatus for about a month or so. However, fear not, fair listeners, for when we return from our hiatus, we will review Jay's pick that will give us a psychological thriller on par with Dexter, along with the sci-fi implications that has been shown to us through Minority Report and several Black Mirror episodes in the 2012 franchise Psycho-Pass. And I know, Jay, you have been excited to talk about that, so I am looking forward to that as well. But Jay, with that being said, what have you got for us today?
All right, so I was going to read a little bit from the Treaty of Troyes, which ended the 100-Year War, in our timeline, the real world. But I was thinking more of that. It was, well, one, the treaty is very boring and has nothing to do with what was going on in the Berserk. So I'm going to close on a quote from an unknown author, and the quote goes as such. The saddest thing about betrayal is that it never comes from your enemies. It comes from those you trust the most.